Okay, I think we're ready to go. So kia ora, I'm Mayor Jamie, and this session tonight online is an opportunity to give an overview of our draft 2023-24 annual plan, which is a snapshot of where Council's at and what we intend to do over the coming 12 months. I'm going to try and keep it fairly casual. This is the first time we've tried this, but we'll still try and describe what the plan contains and how this will be funded and some other snippets of information for some context. Before we get into it, let's cover off some housekeeping just so everyone understands what's happening here and how the event will run. I'm working with a small team helping me in the background here running the Zoom. They have you all muted and all your videos are turned off for the entire duration of the event. The chat is turned off at the moment, but we will be using that a bit later on for you to input any questions you have. So I'll let you know a bit later when that gets turned on. Everyone who's joined us tonight can feel free to type their questions into the chat and we'll either try and answer it tonight or I'll put it on the board for follow-up in the next few days to get back to you. Finally, it's being live streamed and recorded, so the entire event can be viewed later on Council's YouTube channel to give people who can't join us tonight the chance to watch the recording later. Right, when we as a Council set a course for our district, we have to consider the wider context of what is happening in New Zealand. This impacts, of course, what we can do here in Buller in the short, medium and long term. And this is reflected in Council's long-term plan, which is revised every 3 years. Today's discussion, though, is about the annual plan for 23-24 and is very close to what was indicated in year 3 of our long-term plan. We'll talk through the 2 or 3 things that are different this year to what has been previously signalled. And I'll touch on some of our key projects to come, as well as what's been achieved over the past year. I'll be talking a lot about the annual plan, and some might actually wonder what an annual plan is and how it fits into the big picture for our district. So we'll quickly cover that off before we get into the detail. The annual plan is reviewed every year, and the long-term plan is reviewed every 3 years, and that's happening next year. Essentially, the long-term plan outlines a 10-year pathway for our district, and the annual plan is the 1-year snapshot of that for each year. So the 2023-24 draft annual plan is the 3rd year of our long-term plan that we effectively wrote in 2021. So this year's annual plan is largely consistent with what we signalled in the current LTP. As the changes to projects and services are not significant or materially different to that that was proposed, Council will not be undertaking a formal consultation process on the annual plan this year. But we still want to keep you informed about what's proposed and how it will affect you, and we certainly welcome feedback, and that is what today is really all about. So you can provide your feedback or ask questions today or tonight on the plan using the chat function a little bit later, and we'll let you know when it's time for that. You could also email if you like to annualplan@bdc.govt.nz for any feedback or questions, or go really old school and talk to your elected members out and about in the community all about the annual plan. You can find out their contact details on Council's website. So that's sort of the housekeeping and a bit of detail on what this is all about. So let's get into it. So these are the draft annual plan documents. It comes in a summary version and a full plan. Obviously, the full plan is a fairly substantial document which contains our intentions and the financial breakdown and quite a bit of detail. There is a lot on our plate this year, and that's why we've themed this plan as a year of delivery. And this headline, if you like, is largely reflecting the capital works program. There's around triple what we would normally do, or what we would normally have to deliver, and we're ready to certainly ready to get into that. The summary and the full draft annual plan are available to read at Council's customer service facilities in Reefton and Westport, as well as the Westport Library. I just lost my page, goodness me. There we go, teething problem. As well as the Sue Thompson Casey Memorial Library in Westport, the Dock Visitor Centre in Punakaiki, the Karamea Information Centre, and the Northern Buller Resource Centre, and of course, as always, also on Council's website. So I'm going to use the summary document tonight to illustrate and talk through some key points. So as a council, we have 4 main areas of responsibility. These are maintaining key infrastructure, things like our roads and water supplies and footpaths, carrying out our regulatory responsibilities. So that's our building consents, resource consents and planning functions, to deliver community services and support, like our libraries, community funding and the MBS Theatre, and keep our community facilities in good shape, things like Victoria Square and the many halls we have around the Buller District. For the coming 12 months covered by this plan, we try to deliver on what was already signalled in our LTP. However, there are some slight changes, and hence, if you want a short and sweet overview and understand those, you can read just the smaller 12-page document. So we'll dive into it. Some of the key points is the funding impact of flood events. So we know that the floods had a huge impact on our district and our people, and a year ago we were early in the stages of recovery. We have received around 50 million from central government agencies to help with the recovery from these events, which is hugely appreciated, of course. That's helped cover the costs of the response and recovery, such as roading and water infrastructure repairs, the huge waste disposal issues, the temporary accommodation and community support via our community hub and navigators. But despite all of the support, Council is responsible for some of the flood recovery costs that are not covered by central government funding, including the cost of emergency operations centre facilities and the thresholds for NEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency, and Waka Kotahi funding. Essentially, these agencies pay most of the cost, but there is a part that Council is responsible to finance, and there is no way around this, and believe me, we've certainly tried. So this annual plan, we've accounted to cover a provisional estimate of 1.75 million of these unavoidable costs and are proposing to use cash reserves to cover this. We prefer this rather than setting a new targeted rate or setting a special levy to cover it. Effectively, we're dipping into our rainy day fund to cover these costs. In addition to this external support from flood recovery, the Prime Minister announced just last Friday that central government will inject another just under $23 million into our district to support flood protection in Westport. This funding will support the various local agencies to work together and on the solutions addressing Westport's flood protection and adaptation. Three Waters reform and targeted rates, and what this means for your targeted rates. So the outcome of government's Three Waters reforms for New Zealand currently remains really uncertain. As you can imagine, that makes it a bit hard for us to plan. So we have to base our annual plan on certain assumptions. However, there could easily be changes during the year led by central government that alters things. We simply can't predict that at this stage. Council is planning on the current law and direction continuing, and that the reforms will proceed, and assets and the associated debt will transfer to the new water services entity in the future. Beg your pardon. Council is facing rising costs for water and wastewater services due to increases in inflation, interest rates, and higher contract costs. Council is also increasing our capital investment in our Three Water services by $6.7 million. This is more than we have forecasted in the long-term plan, and includes 4.8 million in external funding and 1.9 million from Council as part of our regular investment in our water infrastructure. Despite these increasing costs and increased investment, we propose to hold water and wastewater targeted rates at the same level as in the 22-23 year, while we wait for further clarity on the Three Waters reform. Holding these rates at last year's level would result in a $1.2 million shortfall, which Council will fund initially from cash reserves, but we will need to recover this in future years, either through increases to water rates or a transfer of these to the new entities. Road to Zero funding is another initiative this year that is dear to our hearts, making roads around schools slower and therefore safer for children. Road to Zero is the Waka Kotahi NZTA road safety strategy, which aims to significantly reduce deaths and injuries on New Zealand roads. A key item in that strategy is to set safe speed limits around all schools by the end of 2027. So we'll start this year working with schools and communities to develop safe speed limits while the funding and strategy is available to us. Although this initiative actually costs $245,000 in this annual plan, our 72% funding from Waka Kotahi means that the ratepayer contribution is $68,000 to be funded from general rates. Looking ahead now to the capital program. In terms of our spending on big ticket items, you can see we have a lot coming up, and this work is funded by both council and government agencies. In the 23-24 year, we're forecasting a total capital spend of $28.8 million. That's a significant increase on the past 2 years and is again heavily subsidised by government funding. If we have a look at the summary document and at the year ahead on pages 5 and 6, you start looking at some of the big roading and infrastructure projects for the year ahead, but we'll just pick out a few of them. There's 9.8 there for roading network reinstatement. This is funding from Waka Kotahi, targeted at roading infrastructure damaged by the floods. Essentially, the return to service of the many sites of road damage around our district from the flood events. This includes roads from Charleston to Karamea and as far east as Reefton. What's even better about this piece is that we were able to negotiate for Waka Kotahi to almost fully fund this work, significantly reducing the amount council has to pay. Normally it'd be a 72% subsidy. We've negotiated nearly 100% subsidy for all of this work, which is really good news and a big win for a small council like us. Across from there on the page, there's $2.1 million for local road renewals. Again, this is 72% subsidised by Waka Kotahi and is largely our business as usual funding that we apply for every 3 years. Carries out mostly our resealing work on around 40 kilometres of local roads each year. Also on there is the Karamea highway renewals, another $1 million, 100% funded by Waka Kotahi, which again is fantastic and part of our much bigger overall spend on roading in Northern Bulla. Another really good piece of news for council this year was securing this $7 million in funding from the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund, or the IAF. Overall, the IAF will provide more than $13 million to provide key council infrastructure, things like waste, storm and drinking water to Elmer Road. And $7 million is the first out of 2 allocations there. The fund helps local councils, so it's for council infrastructure to provide to improvements to that for water, drains, footpaths and roads in order for private developers to build new housing to support our community as it grows into the future. Some of this is going to go towards an underpass under State Highway 67, making it safer and easier for pedestrians and people on bikes to access the Elmer Road area. Other things on this page are all about improving our 3 water systems. So that's our stormwater, drinking water and wastewater. Council negotiated a $17 million package of essential infrastructure projects from NEMA, which included some betterment of $500,000 as part of a $1.5 million NEMA package that relates to 3 waters repairs, and these are largely in the Westport area. A lot of that work is underway, physically already underway or in the planning stages, and some of it has actually been completed. Council also plans to spend $300,000 of our Department of Internal Affairs Better Off package on 3 waters infrastructure upgrades in Westport and surrounds. I know there's plenty of jargon there, but just a quick explanation. Better Off funding from the Department of Internal Affairs, or the DIA, is part of government's 3 waters reforms and focuses on ensuring councils are supported through a just transition of our assets to the new water services entity. Overall, Bulla received $3.5 million in Better Off funding for the first round, which is being applied to various projects across the district. So as I said, $300,000 of that is going into some 3 waters infrastructure upgrades. Still on the same page, we have a number of council-funded items linked also to water improvements. So we have backflow prevention and water supply renewals in Westport, that's around $1 million, as well as sewer renewals in Westport, another $1.2 million, and in Reefton, about $500,000. This all represents positive outcomes for our district and our community. So in short, we're getting a lot of help from central government to both fix and improve our key infrastructure, which I think is important to acknowledge. But council's also focusing on this core function with more funding spent on stormwater improvements, flood mitigation work, as well as some improvements to local facilities. And this is all about making us more resilient to future flood events. In terms of facilities, the plan is for Reefton Pool to be resurfaced and a new hydrotherapy pool installed among other improvements to that facility. The MBS Theatre here in Westport will get a new stage and heating and ventilation, air conditioning work done, and there'll be upgrades to the clock tower chambers, including to the toilets and the heating system in this building. Council has another range of other initiatives coming up that were already provided for in the 23-24 annual plan, and they include community grants funding totaling $422,000 across the tourism, museum and community grants spaces, completing our rates review for different rating system options and a preferred method for our rates calculation. A lot of work to engage with the community and set our direction for the next 10 years in the long-term plan. So that's always a very important body of work. We're going to continue our property rationalisation project to realise financial opportunities through the sale of surplus land and buildings which are currently underutilised. Further investment into urban revitalisation, and continue to engage with community and stakeholders on the next stages of our climate change adaptation plan. Very important work going on there. This gives you a snapshot of what's slightly different in the annual plan and the work we want to continue on with this coming year. I'll give you a quick update on some things that have been completed during the year we are in right now. So the Westport Water Supply Trunk Main Replacement Project. It's a key infrastructure project to replace an ageing trunk main, water pipes supplying Westport and Carter's Beach with drinking water. We've already completed the first stage, being the terrace section. The section from the terrace to McKenna Road is being completed in 2 stages, with the first already completed and the second one due for completion in June or July of this current year. The final stage of this project is still in final planning. Long story short, once this is all complete, Council will have fully replaced the 130-year-old main line from source to town in around 3 or 4 years, largely externally funded. In Reefton, we're working towards completing the project to chlorinate the Reefton water supply to meet current regulations and improve safety, and that'll be complete by the end of June. And the Waimangaroa water supply upgrade project has provided a variety of improvements that aim to improve the resilience of the supply and prevent the disruptions that have largely plagued that supply over the last year or so. The project, which will ultimately see 2,200 metres of new pipeline installed, is nearing completion, with the remainder of the work due to be wrapped up by the end of next month. In the infrastructure space, we've touched on some of this earlier around the NEMA funding of essential infrastructure, but a lot of that work is perhaps not well known to people. Things like the wharf damage, a major body of work underway there, shipping channel dredging, tip head rock repairs, some rock protection works in Reefton, and some of the Three Waters and betterment projects I've already mentioned earlier. The wharf is quite a big one, and there's a lot of planning going on there to get that work underway later this year. Once started, it'll take about a year to complete. But what it'll ensure is that we have another section of wharf that continues to function for Westport and Buller into the future and can cater to large shipping vessels. Same goes for the dredging work. In this context, it's about keeping the key shipping channels clear and enabling that port development to continue. The eastern tip head repair is complete, and work on the Reefton stock bank is all but complete, and then the larger rock protection around the historic Reefton landfill is about to commence. We've touched on the Three Waters and the betterment recovery-related Three Waters program, which is nearly complete, and then the betterment work will roll out and be aiming to complete by the end of April 2024. A really good win for our facilities this year was a new roof for the MBS Theatre, as well as a successful amalgamation of the Reefton Visitor Centre with some building consents and further work to continue there to improve that facility for residents and visitors to Reefton. So we'll talk a little bit about the financials now. So less than 8,000 rateable properties, bringing in just under $19 million in rates. We are, by New Zealand standards, a pretty small council. And this again puts into perspective the sheer amount of work that we've got on at the moment and what council has achieved by bringing in so much external funding. In terms of the numbers, we're expecting an operating surplus of $16 million. And this largely reflects the amount of grants and subsidies we are getting in to carry out what is largely capital expenditure. In reality, councils, like all of councils in New Zealand, are facing higher interest rates on debt and higher inflation on almost all of the things that we do. So overall, rates are proposed to rise by an average of 6.8% from 1 July 2023. This is higher than the 5.4% forecast in the long-term plan, but it reflects changes in the economic conditions over the past 12 months. We're acutely aware of the financial pressures on many people are facing, which is why Council has worked hard to pull together a work program that keeps rates as low as possible, while ensuring that we have a successful flood recovery and our community services and facilities continue to be improved and maintained. So we've talked a lot about the annual plan. Whoops, I think I've already talked about that. Apologies. So I think that's probably largely wrapping up, and I'll ask the team now to turn on the chat, and you're invited to enter your questions. We'll endeavour to answer them. I've shared quite a lot of information, and I'll share a few key dates while you're getting your chats questions fed in if there are any. So Sunday the 28th of May, we're aiming to have the community feedback closing off. 29th of May, 2nd of June, that feedback's collated and a report will be produced for a council workshop. 7th of June, councillors workshop that, and the 28th of June, council will adopt the annual plan. And then from 1 July, the annual plan will come into effect and reflect your rates changes and the like. So quick finishing changes. So that's kind of our wrap of the draft annual plan for this coming year, 23 and 24. A year ago, we were in the early stages of recovery from the weather events and had a huge impact on our district and people. We can't avoid all of the costs of that. Our partners in central government have provided a lot of much needed support for our recovery and our rebuild work. Much remains to be done this year, and our focus also turns to future-proofing our infrastructure and continuing discussions on the impacts of climate change. Like other sectors of the community, council's facing ongoing financial pressures from inflation and rising costs, but we're working hard to limit the impact of these and keep rates well below the level of inflation. It has been encouraging to see how quickly my new council has settled into work following the elections late last year. We have several new faces around the table, and they're bringing fresh ideas and energy to our discussions, and certainly streamlined some of our committee structures to provide a stronger focus on the core issues. We're continuing to work with central government and our other partners to ensure we're prepared for the Three Waters reforms in 2024 and beyond, while progressing our critical local capital projects for drinking water, stormwater and wastewater while we still control those. We'll continue to work closely with the West Coast Regional Council and the Department of Internal Affairs on delivery of the recently announced flood protection package. And there's certainly a lot of detail that is not yet fully developed and to be shared at this time. So that's sort of it from me. I will go to the full version of the Zoom now and deal with any chats, any questions in the chat. Okay, it looks like the questions are few and far between. So I guess we'll just quickly reiterate your options to feedback. So don't forget, all of your councillors are out and about in the wards and certainly are keen to hear any of your feedback that you wish to provide in terms of the annual plan. You can go to any council facilities in our council service centres, libraries, and of course council's website for a copy of the summary document or the full annual plan, if that's what interests you. You can email annualplan@bdc.govt.nz with any feedback or questions, or of course come to one of my Mayor's chats on a Monday morning and feedback directly to me. So thank you all very much for your time, and I hope you've found this useful and informative. Have a good evening.